Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andong, who was just introduced.
뭐 저는 이제 된장이라고 했는데
Well, I mentioned
이
Tenzhang in
된장이라는
my
마음속에
title, but
간장이
sometimes the
포함된
Doenjang
개념이
includes
있을까라는 것을
간장. So
좀
please bear that in mind
말씀드리도록 하도록
when I
하겠습니다.
mention Doenjang.
인종 음식이라는 것이 과연
Well, national
무엇인가?
food. What is a
그리고
national food?
삼민족
And
음식 가운데서 가장
among the
오래된 것은
Korean national
무엇일까?
food, what
그것을
is the
질문을
oldest one?
드린다면
Sometimes I ask this
좀 한번
question,
보게 되는 것이
and
사실입니다.
I
인종
also
음식은
find
오랜
hard time
세월을
to
지켜
respond
있는
to this question,
측면에서
because
삼민족
national food
공동체의
is
음식이고
the food
오랜
shared
역사와
among
더불어
the Korean
누적되어 온
people from
유산의
ancient times, and it is a kind of accumulated traditional culture.
평가할 수 있습니다. 민족 음식
So
중에서
among
아마
the basic, among
된장만
the Korean
오래된
ancient
것이
food,
있을까? 물론
maybe the
밥이라는
Doenjang is the
음식이
oldest one. Of course, we
있지만
have a rice
밥은
or pop.
너무나 포괄적
This is
있고
the main
그래도
staple, but it
된장
may
정도는
sound very
되어야
much
좀
comprehensive.
포괄성이
So at least we need
이
to
민족과
point
더불어서
the doenjang as a
촉진하는
national
것입니다.
food when we
왜
talk about the
그러냐면
national
이
food.
된장은
That's
삼국
because
때부터
the
지금까지
doenjang
오랫동안
has
우리
been
인류의
enjoyed
입맛을
by the Korean
좌우하는 기본
people
음식이었습니다.
since three nation
돈가스
period.
된장은 한국인의 인족 음식 가운데서
So
가장
among
중요한
the
위상을
other nation food, I
갖고
think the
있습니다.
doenjang enjoys the most
우리
solid
인종이 배운
status among
된장
the national food.
생산과 분해 과정에
And
대한
production
연구는
and consumption
다른
on
민족과
doenjang
구별 되는
are
각
generally
민족의
perceived as
전통
a Korean
문화와 생활
traditional
방식에
culture
대한
and lifestyle,
연구까지
because this actually
시작되었습니다.
shows a differentiation
된장은
against other
일상적
countries.
음식이었기 때문에
Doenjang is a very
한국인의
usual
식사
side
문화를
dish
이해하는데
and is a
큰
very
어려움을 했습니다.
useful way to better understand the daily life of Koreans.
된장의 주 재료가 콩,
As you
소금,
know, the main
물인데
ingredient of
이것은
doenjang
앞서
includes the
다른
beans and the salt.
선생님께서도
Well, I think
이야기하셨는데
this was
많이
mentioned previously
다루었습니다.
by other speakers,
그리고 또 최덕경
and
교수님께서
Professor
많이
Choi Kyung will
연구해서
talk a
발표하실
little bit
겁니다.
more because this is one of
이
his
콩의
specialty
유산지가
area.
한반도와 만주
The
일대다라고 하는
original
점이 한국인들이
place of the production,
콩으로
the Kong is
된장을
bean
만들었을 수
is
있다고
Manchuria and the
이야기하는
Korean
점입니다.
peninsula, and we have a
그리고
very favorable natural and
재배가
geographic
쉽고
condition for growing
수확량이
and consuming
많아서
beans.
재배에
And beans are very
경제성이
easy to grow and offer abundant
높습니다.
harvest, which gives
콩도
a high
면적의
cultivation
30%
payoff.
내지
And bean
40%를 차지하고
is made
있습니다.
of more than 30% or
혹시
40% of
가운데서 아니
protein,
참
and the
이것으로
grain size
때로는
of
주식과 부수의
bean is
차이를
big enough to
가져다는
become
그런 음식이라고
uh,
평가할 수
a
있습니다.
main staple as well as a
콩으로는
side dish
밥을
at the
지을 수
same time.
있고
Of
두부를
course, you
만들
can
수
make
된장은
rice, and you also can make a
음식으로
tofu by
쓸 수
using
있어서 주식용 재료와
uh,
부식용 재료의
doenjang.
조건을
So
동시에
beans definitely
인정
can
음식으로
satisfy conditions for
쓸
both
수 있다고 볼 수 있습니다.
main dish and the side dish at the same
최덕경
time. This is the
선생님께서
study
연구하신
done
내용을
by
짧게
Professor Choi Kyung. So please
적어보았습니다만
allow me
뒤에
to quote
교수님께서도
what he has
자세하게
studied. I
밝히실
believe he will
것이고
cover the details
이
later
중국
on.
언론인 재민뉴스의
We have a Chemin Yosul. This is the agriculture technical the journals. This is the oldest Chinese farming technique manual published in the early 6th century, and this introduces yellow bean, yellow cordia bean, and the black cordia bean, and the greenish yellow bean as well as a bidu. And the journals actually introduced these different type of the beans. And another study done by Kim Jong-un showed more than 900 different types of the soybeans in Korean Peninsula. So this means that any food made of the soybean first started in the Koguryo. So again, the Doenjang is the most representative food made of the soybean that was first invented in the Koguryo. And now let me introduce the study by Kim Ki-hong. And during the earlier Han and later Han period, Jang was made with bean, and this food was perceived to be foreign and was said to come from a foreign country. So Jang was widely made in Manchuria and northern part of the Korean peninsula, where beans were very usual and common, and then disseminated into China. And another data, this is the Dongi section, especially Korea chapter in Dongi section in Three Nation history. So people in Korea like something clean, meaning that they're very good at making brewing alcohol, which can be interpreted that they had good skill in making fermented food. And in the new book of Tang, in 11th century, it says that the Doenjang was recorded as a specialty product from Palhe. And in case of the 10th century Japanese classification book, it shows that Maljang is a Jang from Goguryeo, and it derives from Jang of Goguryeo, and the Maljang is the same as miso. And in I think these days the Jang or the Meju sometimes is exchanged very seldomly exchanged as a gift. Well, of course, this is used as a kind of ritual food on the table, but before, because this was also introduced uh, during the Shilla dynasty, because when they get married, especially when King Shimon got married, he sent the original Chang to his bride. The Tenzhang in Koguryo and Shilla went to the Japan, and this also can be found in the historic record. So Jang from Koguryo uh, was disseminated to the Japan, and at the same time, Araiseki in the 17th century, he's the naturalist, also mentioned that uh, it, the Maljang of Koguryo came to Japan. And he also said there's a linguist, Kanazawa, he said the Japanese miso derives from Maljang of the Shilla dynasty and Omejo during the Koryo dynasty. And this is also same as the Mejo during the modern Choson dynasty. Now I'd like to talk about how you make chang. So you make the soybean lump. This is a kind of annual event among all family members. In our generation, especially looking back my younger days, it definitely the measure making or the doenjang making is the annual event. So you first start with the making the soybean lump. So you need to select the fortunate day, and this also has a very significant meaning. So all family members join together to boil the soybean, and we all help boiling the soybean. So this is again annual event for the family. Let me give one example. Especially when you choose the date for the decision making, especially in the Gai village of the Pungcheon County in Andong-si, they actually review the day's fortune. So when they choose the day, they prefer hairy animal days such as chicken, horse, and the pig, and they try to avoid non-hairy animal days such as snake and dragon based on the zodiac sign animals. So again, this is a criteria also is applied to the date of the making zhang and also boiling down the zhang. Now let's talk about the making a soybean lump. This is maybe too familiar to you, and I don't need to explain about this in detail. But it has been a kind of custom, and especially as a Korean, as something that everybody knows. So even the Korean residents living overseas know how to make soybean, or at least they have heard of how to make a soybean. This means that this is a very, very important or the crucial part of the Korean food culture. So you make a soybean lump, so you make it dry, and after some time, you can see the mold. Of course, this is a edible mold, and then it goes under, I mean, the fermentation. So this is the basic process of making soybean. So you make a soybean lump and make soybean lump. So this is a kind of tough
당당무기를
job. So
함께
sometimes
동원이 되었습니다.
the all family members, including head of family and the sons, are also mobilized to make
당당무기를
jang.
보면은 모국 예술형의 문화다
We also
일반적으로
see
그런
the
문화를
passing down
어점으로 할 수
of the
있을지라고
technique of making
생각합니다.
jang, normally from mother-in-law to
보통적으로
a
이
daughter-in-law.
장담무기를
Making
생활
jang is
기술이
traditionally led by elderly ladies within the family who have more experiences in housework,
젊은 여성들은
and the
시장에서
young females
그냥 그런
learn how to make a
방식을
jang
배운
from
것이
their mothers
있고
before they get married.
또 불안정하기 때문에 시집온
And
이후에도
even after
수년간
they get married, I mean,
시어머니가
of course,
된장을
even they
만들
learn from their
때
own mom, they
장에서
also learn
배운
to make it by
해석이니까
helping their
그래서
mother-in-laws for several years
진정에서는 어머니에
after
대해서
they get married.
따르고
So
시집을
when
오면
they're single,
시어머니에
they learn
대해서
from their
며느리로
mothers, and once they get married, they
여성
learn it again
문화의
from
중요한
their
내용이라고
mothers-in-law. So this is also another very
그런데
important
모든
part of
집에서
the food
전문의
culture.
조사를 해보면
However, especially
모든
when we
집에서
conduct a study
이 장 담그는
on
것을
the
어김없이
jang making in the
하지
household, we
못했다
also
하는
see kind of the
사례들을
difficulties as well
확인할
as
볼
differences.
수가
And
있습니다.
not all the household can make
대개는
jang. That's
소금이나
because they
콩이
don't have enough salt
섞어서
or soybeans.
된장을 볶았는다.
So they
이
cannot make a
기계의
jang.
전반경인
Especially in the early
상황으로
20th
제가
century,
말씀드립니다.
we sometimes witness
소금이
this kind of
쌌죠.
situation.
또
The soy, I mean,
대륙에서는
price of the
소금을
salt was quite high,
바닷가 쪽에서
and
소금을
the
받아야
supply of the
되기
salt
때문에
was not very
물량이
smooth.
쌓이고 하면은
Sometimes there is see the lack of the
장담무기의
supply
시장이
uh,
생기기도
to
했습니다.
make jang.
그다음에 가족 원수에 비해서 콩이
And
부족하면은
sometimes we see
등류를
the lacking
섞어서
amount of the
등류장이라고
soybean,
하는 것을
so they are
만드는데
forced to mix it together with the rice chaff called the
뭐랄까요?
dungyo and
부족한
make it
장의
dungyo.
양을 늘리는
Well, this
방법
is
중에
one
하나가
way to
있는 것
increase
같습니다.
the total
일반적으로
amount of
물을
the jang.
많이 부어서
And sometimes they also add
물장을
a lot of
만든
water
장도
and make
있다.
muljang or watery
이것도
jang.
그 장의 양을 늘리기
Again,
위한
this is one way to increase the
예를
total
들어
volume of
육장이라는 것을
jang.
만드는
And sometimes
사례도
they make a
있어서
jang or
전체적으로 보면
juicy
이
jang as a kind of
가정의
specialty. So
형편에
depending
따라서
on the situation of
장
the
담그는
household,
것이
they have a different
차이가 있었다.
practice in
모든 집에
making the jang.
동일하게
So
적용될 수
again, we
있는
sometimes see the
문제가 아니었다
discrepancies
하는
or
것입니다.
the differences
그런데
in making jang
장담무기를
depending
하기
on
싫어서 안
each
하는 것입니다.
household. Of course, sometimes they don't make it not because they don't like to make it. They can make it just because they do not have sufficient resources to make a jang.
또 해외
Now,
함족으로
let me talk about the
성장을
Koreans living
해봐도
overseas.
중국이나
In sometimes
동남아시아
they live in China
한쪽
or
지역을
the
조사를
Central
해봐도 해마다
Asia.
된장을 담가
Almost every year they
먹는다라는
make doenjang,
이야기를
even though they live overseas.
일반적으로 들을 수가
So
있습니다.
this is the kind of story that we hear
그래서
very frequently.
조선 중국어
Well,
선조들이
especially the
보기에도
Korean Chinese, I mean the
이
second
전
generation or
세계에서는
the third
된장무기나
generation,
된장찌개를
uh,
일상적으로
still
먹고
take
따라서 예술문이
doenjang
지나다
soup.
보니
So over
한민족도
time,
조선족의 된장을
sometimes
소유해서 먹을 수 없다. 제가
the
직접
Han
조사를
and the people,
해본
I mean the Han
내용입니다.
or the Chinese people also uh,
동남아시아의 카자흐스탄,
take
우즈베키스탄,
doenjang
고려인들
because they
특히나
also see their neighbors of Korean Chinese take it. So sometimes they put the dried cabbage into the doenjang and make a soup. So they call it shirakjang, meaning the jang with the dried cabbage. So again, this has become a very common food or the diet for them.
까다로운 러시아인들
And
가운데서
even the Russians or the
고대의
Kazakhstan
된장을 소유해서 먹는
order
사례가
the
제법
doenjang
있다는 것을
from
확인을
the
했습니다.
Korean the
물론
people and they consume it.
고려인들도
Of course,
까다로운 러시아인
they
에게는 한국의 음식을 받아들여서
also accept the Korean food and
받아들이는
enjoy
이루어지는데
this Korean food,
앞에서 다
including the doenjang.
이루어지는지 그는 일방만
So of course, there's always vice versa. You know, you take the other exotic food and
그때
vice
19세기
versa.
말기 우리
So after
민족이
19th century, especially the
중국의
late
이후
19th century,
동남아시아 쪽으로
the Korean people
이주하면서 이 나라의
migrated
된장의
to
유통을
the Manchuria
시작하지
as well as Central
것을
Asia. So doenjang also eventually
그러나
went together with them. But you also need to have a right condition for growing the beans. So as long as the geographical condition allow them to grow and plant the soybean, definitely they can make doenjang. So that also depends on the environment that they live. Now, I'd like to talk about the status and the identity of Tenzhang in terms of the food culture. So, what is the perception of on Doenjang by Korean people? Please take a look at this slide. So again, doenjang is a very beneficial to our health. Well, this is a very healthy food, and this also gives you energy and the power. So please take a look at this table. Koreans have uh, diverse side dishes. So I actually have the vertical X as well as the horizontal X. So left hand side shows giving no energy, and the right hand side shows they're giving a lot of energy. And the top part shows the very tasty, and the bottom part says not very tasty. So imagine that you take rice with the kimchi and the doenjang, and then the doenjang position. Of course, I mean, doenjang itself is a very usual and common food, but this is slightly tilted to the right-hand side of this quadrant, meaning that this gives energy. And I will talk about this one in detail later on. Well, of course, it's there's no point of denying that this is very tasty. So we have other Korean traditional food in the uh, bottom left quadrant of this table. So in case of the seasonal vegetable soup or the barley rice cake, they are not very tasty and it gives no energy. But doenjang is positioned in the opposite side. Doenjang is very frequently consumed. I would say it's actually number one. And it also offers diverse application. And it's very usual food, readily available anytime, anywhere by anyone all around the year. And even without any dish, you still can have the meal with the doenjang. So you can easily make a stew or thick stew or light soup. And the doenjang is an extremely ordinary side dish beyond any social classes, any reason or seasonality. So it's not very highly premium dish, nor too shabby or poor dish. However, doenjang was not included into the ritual food, demonstrating that the doenjang is such a simple and usual food consumed almost every day. Well, there's a highlighted uh, line here. You cannot get strong only with eating a seasonal vegetable. So you should eat doenjang. So this is the saying that was repeated over and over by our and my mother's generation or the older generation because doenjang is rich in protein. So maybe they have this kind of wisdom based on their own experiences because doenjang is perceived as a food offering high energy among other daily food. So that's why I highlighted it with the blue color in the center of my slide. So in the daily diet where meat and fish are very rare, doenjang is an important source for energy and strength. So it symbolizes power and health. So during poor harvest years and during season of spring poverty, people still could sustain their living by relying on doenjang. Well, what if you only have a seasonal vegetable without mixing it with the doenjang? This is what our old generation has. If you have a seasonal vegetable only, then you may have some swelling on your body. However, if you mix Doenjang together with the seasonal vegetable, then you would not have that kind of symptoms. So again, Doenjang definitely is a source of energy for survival. Now let me move on and then talk a little bit about the taste of doenjang. Well, how would you describe the taste of the doenjang? Well, first of all, I think doenjang has a kind of gusu taste, meaning you feel very much comfortable in your stomach after taking it. Marvin Harris, he's an anthropologist in the United States, and then he says that the preference and resistance against food comes from the people's fundamental way of thinking, emphasizing the importance of a cultural perception on food. So among all other food, I think the doenjang really has a very, very mild and comfortable taste. And we also have the doenjang soup, and this also gives you a very pleasant and comfortable taste or feeling in your stomach. So that's why people get almost addicted to doenjang, and then they keep taking doenjang. So it has a very pleasant and comfortable taste. Well, of course, you can have it raw and you can make a stew or you can make a soup. And the taste may vary depending on the kind of ingredient or the sauce that you put in. But overall, the doenjang's taste is very pleasant and comfortable. I think the taste of doenjang is a sort of converged taste for Korean food. So it's not bitter or it's not just sweet. So you cannot have a very single expression on uh, the doenjang taste. So again, it's a kind of all combined, comprehensive taste. So I would say that a doenjang is a kind of a crucible of all the taste. And it has a combined taste of the several different taste. And sometimes you have a sense of bonding or belonging by understanding if some people has a right expression of the doenjang taste. That's why this is something that you cannot get easily sick and tired of. Tenzhang also represents the family tradition or the family custom. The taste of Tenzhang varies depending on how each household make and manage or they keep the Tenzhang. And the people often relate Tenzhang taste of a family to other features of the family, and people often perceive doenjang, the taste of the family, as a representative feature of the family. There's a saying that, oh, more fortune or luck goes to family where doenjang taste is very sweet and savory, and the doenjang taste become better when the family has a good daughter-in-law, or the politics of the village determined by the taste of the alcohol, while the affairs of the family are determined by the taste of the doenjang. So this is a kind of very common saying. Doenjang taste tells how a family moves on. They also can see the fortune and misfortune of the family. Why the doenjang represents or symbolizes the family tradition? Because it is just a type of food, but it still becomes a barometer to determine the fortunes and misfortunes of the family. And that's because doenjang taste is perceived to be the family identity. The food is a combination of personality, power, and history, and family is a common members who share the food together. Doenjang has outstanding preservability or the storability, and you make it a lot at one time and keep it for 1 year to make various side dishes. So how much care you give to doenjang is equal to how much integrity you give to your life, especially by people who is in charge of the housework of the family. And the storage and the management or the care of the doenjang was a mechanism of how to execute the relationship between mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, and there's lots of sincere care as well as taboo. So when a daughter-in-law well accepts and practices how to make doenjang from the mother-in-law, the family will get prosperous more. Now I would like to talk about the status and the meaning of the doenjang. I think it was the 1970s. At that time, we had uh, self-making as well as the self-consumption of Tenzhang. But with the industrialization and urbanization, we witnessed a lot of different changes. In 1970s, Korea was still a developing country. Sometimes we were slightly ashamed of the doenjang because it's very smelly, very unsophisticated, and too much local. That is the image that we had or associated with the doenjang. However, at the same time, uh, we could realize that we are all Koreans. It gives a sense of unity. So that's why we regard it as a quintessence of the national identity. With more vibrant exchanges later on, the criteria of the food also, actually, especially from the late 1980s, the meaning and significance of food was determined based on health benefits. And Tenzhang has rich ingredients with anti-carcinogenic substances or anti-cancer substances, and that has become a food that we are very much proud of. And so again, people emphasize that the doenjang also prove that doenjang definitely has a lot of beneficial ingredient to fight against the cancer. And we also realize the value of the doenjang. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the recent production and consumption of doenjang and its significance. The first one is self-production and the self-consumption of doenjang, where this tradition is still preserved in the local areas. And the second one is people sometimes purchase a commercial doenjang made at the plant. People living in urban areas or young housewives follow this kind of trend as they have no connection to the countryside. So they just purchase the commercial doenjang. And the third one is these days people also purchase a homemade style doenjang, especially young urban population or upper class who can afford it, purchase this homemade style doenjang. This is going to be my conclusion of my presentation today. The doenjang is a traditional and modern food fit to the Korean taste and the Korean sentiment. So the rationale behind this statement uh, are as follows. So again, it fits to Korean people's taste and it fits the Korean sentiment. It has a combination of taste, beef flavor, and the taste and pleasant element. And this is the kind of taste that you miss if you haven't taken it for a long time. So this is a very basis of the Korean
네,
culture. Thank you
말씀
very much for your
고맙습니다. 바로
presentation.
질의응답
I
시간을
think we can move on
가지겠습니다.
to Q&A
교수님, 한국의
session
대표적인
immediately.
된장에 대해 관심이 많은
Well, a lot of
만큼
people
많은 질문들이
pay attention
이동하는데요.
to
첫
the
번째
doenjang.
질문
So let me give you the
드리겠습니다.
first question.
밥과 채소 위주의 식단에서
If we
된장은
have
영양학적으로
just
필수 양념이었는데요.
rice and
그런데
the
이제
vegetable, then
현대
we may
사회
lack something,
식단에서
and the doenjang
된장은
is becoming very
가열을
essential
가장한
part.
공장
But
생산 선택
sometimes
식품이
we
됐습니다.
see that
이
the
된장의
doenjang is
우수성과
becoming
현대인의
kind of
식인지의
fermented food
구조화를 넘어서
or the commercial
된장의
food.
가치를 이어갈 수
So,
있는
what are
방법이
the ways to
있을까요?
hand down the value of the doenjang? So that is my question. I think it's a relatively difficult question to answer, but very important question that we need to think about. First of all, doenjang well represents our daily life. So of course we had very old poor days, and without the doenjang, we might have had malnutrition and maybe we could not lead our daily lives. But
있습니다.
thanks to Doenjang, we still
특별한
could
음식이
uh,
없어도 된장만 있으면
survive.
얼마든지
So without any special
냉채소와
side dish, you still can
곁들여서 음식을
enjoy your
만들 수 있는
meal
것입니다.
by adding
그래서
doenjang
그
to
시대에도
other vegetables.
남북이
So even
음식
during Korea
갈대를
Dynasty, we had a very
중앙시대에서 나라에서
severe drought,
이
and at
메주,
that time,
간장 같은
the
것,
soybean
된장 같은
lump
것을
and the kanjang
포함해서도
and doenjang
때려주었다는
were
것이
distributed
보아하는
to
사실을
the general public to help
다음으로
them stay healthy.
된장은
And at the
장기간
same time,
유지하고
another benefit
숙성해서
of the
완성하는
doenjang
음식이기
is the
때문에
storability or the preservability.
오늘날
Of course, people take
공장하고
fast
이
food
패스트푸드와
uh, very
대체적인
often, so it is a
그런
completely
조직의
opposite
음식입니다.
to the
따라서
fast
자연
food. So I
속에서
would
오랜
claim that
시간을 거쳐서
the
완성되는
doenjang is a really
것이기
slow
때문에
food because
자연 친화성
you need the
음식이고 또
fermentation and you also need to have a
긴
very long
역사 속에서
process.
또
So
효능이
the
병원적으로
efficacy of
인정된
doenjang
제품이라고 합니다.
uh, already
누가 봐도
was
이
proved.
된장은 몸 안에서 충돌이 없는
There's a no
건강을
conflict
담보하는
inside your
음식이죠.
body once you take it.
느린 음식이기
I mentioned
때문에
that the doenjang is a slow
대체로
food.
오늘날 그
So
빨리빨리
these days
문화가
we have a kind of
만들어내는
quick mentality
순환의
by the Korean
중요한
people
힘이
in modern
있지
times.
않을까.
And I think sometimes it gives
그런
energy
음식을
for us
준비가
to move
되면
on
마음도
in that
여유롭게
speed. So
되는
if you take a
그런
slow food,
효과가
then you
있어서
also have a very,
그것이
very relaxing
현대 정보 통신문명 시대를
mentality.
제어하는 힘을
I think this also
갖게
can
되는 그런
provide
음식으로
energy
생각해 볼 수 있지 않을까
in the
그렇게
IC, I mean, the very
말씀드리고
fast
싶습니다.
information the era.
네, 다음 질문도
So let me
이어가겠습니다.
move on to
이
the next
질문도
question.
중요하지만 어려운
Well,
질문인 것
again, this
같은데요.
question also may be
한국
very
전통
difficult to answer,
장문화를
but very
일반
much important.
가정에서도 습득해
Well, I think the
생활할 수
Jang
있는
culture
교육이나 보급
also
방법,
should be
지속적인
educated
계승 방안
to
어떤 게
educated and
있을까요?
handed down to the ordinary family.
예,
So, what are the ways to hand
재고
it down or
그리고
transmit to
된장 생산과
the
소비를
household?
어떻게
I think
활성화할 수
that
있을
depends on how you actually
것인가도
activate or promote
그것을
the
이해할 필요가
production
있는데
and consumption of
먼저
doenjang.
그 생산의
Well,
활성화점이
first of all, in terms of the promotion of the
김치는
making and
또 문화가 분야
consuming,
같은 데서
I think the kimchi is a kind of
많이
very
하고 또
popular, and we
프로그램도
have a lot of
많이
programs and the
하는데
classes to
이
make a kimchi.
양념국에 대해서는
However,
관심이 훨씬
in case of Jang,
적은 것
people tend
같습니다.
to
그런데
give less
근데
attention to that,
젊은
where
이그
younger people
양장국기에 자신감이
may
없어서 그런
lack some
이제 더
confidence because they
다양한
don't know that's
약간
partly because of the special
성격표가
characteristics of
있다는
the
우려점이 좀
living
있습니다만
of the
이
residents
문제를 좀 해결하는데
setting
또
in Korea.
행복이 되는
So I
방안들을
think we also need to
생각해보면
find a way out
장가라든지
to
호텔
promote it because,
등에서
of course, we have very
이
old
된장을
house
담글 때
and
공개적으로
we can have a kind
지역별로
of
이렇게 좀
open class or
프로그램화해서
open program where we can
외부스타들도 함께
invite the
참여해서
people
이
uh,
된장 담그는
and
것을
show
체험하고 자기가
uh,
만든 것을
how
저희가
to make
갖고
it,
가는
and that we also can
어땠나 그런 생각이 좀
provide opportunity for
듭니다.
them to
그리고
experience the
1년에 한
doenjang
번
making.
이
So it's done
된장을
once a
담그기
year.
때문에
So it's a
의의는
kind of yearly
많습니다.
event, and we
근데
have a lot of
오늘날에 이제
amount to be made
그
because it's done
계량을
only once a year.
꼭 필요로 하는 것은
Of course, we
아니니까
don't require a
양을
very accurate
소규모로
measurement.
해서
So maybe you can
1년에
have a
한두 번
smaller amount. Maybe you can have it several times a year instead of having it only once a year. That way, you can actually manage the uh, the total volume that you make. So that's another way of inviting or inducing more attention into the jang making. And next is about the promotion of the consumption. Well, definitely, doenjang is a very healthy food. So this means that the people get the more accustomed to the taste of doenjang when you get exposed to the doenjang taste over and over again. But most people live in the apartment complex, and sometimes they feel hesitant in cooking some smelly food within the kitchen. So maybe we also can have a study on reducing the malodor or the unique smell coming from the doenjang. Well, last time I had a chance to visit Kazakhstan, and they make bread, and sometimes they use a doenjang as a kind of jam. It was a shocking experience to me. I was wondering if I can really take it or not, and I tried it myself, and it was really, really acceptable. And I think the smell of Tenzhang in Kazakhstan was less severe, so maybe we can have a kind of application of that. And another thing is that we need to have a Jang sharing culture or the campaign, where I know that we already have a kimchi sharing or kimchi making campaign. So maybe in the rural area, normally we do that, but uh, in fact, the sharing is done from the old generation to younger generation, but in most cases, I think the jang making is done from the agricultural villages to the urban areas. So if you take a more fundamental angle, as long as the rural areas are not stable and healthy enough, we cannot expect the transmission of the jang making culture. So again, we also need to think about
네,
the
답변
condition of the rural
고맙습니다.
areas. Thank you
수가식
very much for
교수님께 박수
your
부탁드립니다.